Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, was struck on the crown of his head while in prostration. In these nights, inshallah, we will be commemorating the martyrdom of our Imam. We will now begin our Majlis to commemorate the first in a series of 3 lectures. I would now like to request Brother Aslam Durrani to please come forward at this time for recitation of Salam and Marcia. Let's welcome him with a loud salawat.
Yes. Bari digar salawat. And say ibadat ka saranjam hua, and ibadat ka saranjam hua. Lam wo lam ke jis lam se Islam hua. Lam wo lam ke jis lam se Islam hua. Ye se yaver hua mushkil mein har ek bande ki. Ye se yaver hua mushkil mein har ek bande ki. bھائی صدقے اس نام کے کیا خوب علی نام ہوا. عین سے بارے دیگر صلوات. اٹھا کوئی جنازہ پھر سیدہ کے گھر سے. اٹھا کوئی جنازہ پھر سیدہ کے گھر سے. حسرت برس رہی ہے ایک ایک بام و در سے. اٹھا کوئی جنازہ پھر سیدہ کے گھر سے. یہ کس کو رو رہی ہے زینب تڑپ تڑپ کر، یہ کس کو رو رہی ہے زینب تڑپ تڑپ کر، جنت میں سیدہ نے چادر گرا دی سر سے، اٹھا کوئی جنازہ پھر سیدہ کے گھر سے، جس نے خدا کے گھر کو بخشی تھی آکے زینت، جس نے خدا کے گھر کو بخشی تھی آکے زینت، وہ آج ہو رہا ہے رخصت خدا کے گھر سے، اٹھا کوئی جنازہ پھر سیدہ کے گھر سے، ایسا گمان ہوا شاید آرام آ گیا ہے، ایسا گمان ہوا شاید آرام آ گیا ہے، مولا تڑپ رہے تھے امید کی سحر سے، اٹھا کوئی جنازہ پھر سیدہ کے گھر سے، زینب کے بازوؤں کو شبیر چومتے ہیں، زینب کے بازوؤں کو شبیر چومتے ہیں، کیا جانیے علی نے کیا کہہ دیا پسر سے، اٹھا کوئی جنازہ پھر سیدہ کے گھر سے، قاتل کو اپنے ٹھنڈا شربت پلانے والا قاتل کو اپنے ٹھنڈا شربت پلانے والا بے چین ہو رہا ہے زہر کے اثر سے اٹھا کوئی جنازہ پھر سیدہ کے گھر سے کوفے کا ذرہ ذرہ روتا ہے خون کے آنسو کوفے کا ذرہ ذرہ روتا ہے خون کے آنسو محروم ہو رہے ہیں حسنین اب پدر سے اٹھا کوئی جنازہ پھر سیدہ کے گھر سے صلوات
صلی علی Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Jazakallah Aslam Bhai for his sehat and salamti and khair barakat. Please recite aloud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Brothers and sisters, as we look forward to our Majalis tonight, I wanted to take a moment, for those of you who don't know, but properly introduce our visiting scholar. He is no stranger to the Beit al-Ilm community. For those of you who may not know him, Hujjat al-Islam, Shayk Reza Hemyari was born in Iran and grew up in Northern Virginia. He began his studies in Najaf, Iraq, and continued in the Ahlul Bayt seminary here at Beit al-Ilm. He has recently moved to Qom to further his Hawza studies, and we are incredibly blessed to have him return here for these final nights and weeks. Please join me now in welcoming Hujjat al-Islam, Shaykh Reza Hemyari, to the minbar at this time with a loud salawat.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين إنه خير ناصر ومعين. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلق أجمعين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
Dear teachers, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight is the night of the 19th of Ramadan, the night of Qadr, as well as the beginning of the martyrdom of Amirul Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
In these past few nights we've been talking about how to attain and to live and plan for ourselves a good life. These lives that we live, they have been described, particularly by the Ahlul Bayt, as a journey, despite in this world it being short, but nevertheless a journey that we need to take provisions from, and that we have given certain blessings from Allah to be able to undertake this journey. I'd like to just mention one of those ahadith of Amirul Mu'mineen. This is the testament, the wasiyah that is famously said to be to Imam Al-Hasan alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. The Imam says that وَإِنَّكَ فِي مَنْزِلِ قُلْعَةٍ وَدَارِ بُلْغَةٍ وطريق إلى الآخرة. You are in a sort of place that you will be passing by very quickly, and an abode of provisions, and as well you are on the path to the hereafter. وأنك طريد الموت الذي لا ينجو منه هارب. You are basically like the prey of death, and it is going to come and get you, and there is no escaping from it. There's no way to flee or prevent our own death, however much we might try. So we are on this journey towards Allah, and Allah has given us, alhamdulillah, certain resources for us to undertake this journey. We have mentioned in the past few nights that Allah has given us an intellect, reason for us to figure out our own lives and to make sense of this world, to make good decisions as best as we can. But sometimes we realize how little our provisions are, how little those resources are without the assistance of Allah. Again, this is the night, one of the nights of Qadr, and it is a night that we turn our hearts, our minds, and our souls back unto Allah. And so we are thinking now about our relationship with our Creator and with our Sustainer. And when we are thinking about how to live our lives and all of the resources that Allah has given us, the intellect, the wisdom, the reason that Allah has given us, sometimes we might fool ourselves into thinking that they are enough, particularly if our horizons are very limited. But then Allah, through His infinite wisdom and mercy, He shows how limited we are and how much in need of Him we are. There are moments of crisis There are moments of crisis within our own lives, personal lives. I don't know how to deal with my family, my children, or my parents. Moments of crisis in my society and in my country. Recently, there is a judicial crisis that we might be hearing about. Does the president have the ability to disregard the court's explicit order? Courts have a authority in this country, and the question now becomes, whose authority is greater? And then we don't even need to think about the international and the global crises. After certain ceasefires were created, and then all of a sudden overnight those ceasefires have ended and Muslims are being killed and destroyed and starved to death in front of our very eyes. And we think that the structures and the systems that we have set in place may be or would have been enough until those crises come into play. I might think that I have done enough for my family until I see that my child is disobeying me or is moving farther and farther away from religion and from Allah. I might have thought that the precedent of the judicial branch was enough until this crisis occurs, and then we have to think about how to overcome this crisis. We might have thought that international law and order were enough. And then all of a sudden, events like this past year occur, and we have to rethink and reevaluate our current situation. And sometimes we might think that our resources are enough, our intellect is enough to overcome it. But then in those moments of crisis, Allah shows us how little we have in hand. He says, we will try you. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ. We will try you with a bit of fear, a bit of hunger, and we will take away from you some of yourself and some of your soul and some of the things that you have surrounded yourself with, your material and your physical resources, your families, and we will take them away from you. All of those things you put your trust and your hope in, those are the things that Allah will try you with. And so sometimes we might think that in moments where we are outside of crisis, in moments of peace and prosperity and tranquility, those are the moments that we don't need Allah and we can turn away. But when we look in the words of the Ahlul Bayt, and in particular Amirul Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, he says that those are the moments that actually we need to be remembering Allah even more. So yes, we are in moments of crisis, but at least now we have the opportunity to turn back unto Allah. We are thinking about the wisdom and the intellect, these beautiful resources. We cannot underappreciate what Allah has given us, but ultimately these resources are limited. And our horizons are limited. And so we need to think about what are the other resources, and in particular that religion and that guidance that Allah gives to us from without, that Allah sends through His prophets. I mentioned in these past few nights that wisdom is in line with and is sometimes defined in terms of the intellect, that inner source of guidance that Allah has given us. But then last night there was this hadith of our fifth Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam, wherein the Imam says, al-hikmatu ta'atullah. Sometimes we think that wisdom is about knowing how to, for example, deal with the details and the ins and outs of our life, the small things, and maybe even sometimes the big things, knowing the big picture, knowing the more valuable and the more important things in life. Maybe having more experience in particular career or in general about living and not worrying about the small stuff. But then the Ahlul Bayt, they redirect and they broaden our horizons and our values and redefine what it means to have wisdom. They say wisdom is not just about being able to reconcile your relationships or even being willing to spend more time with your community, with your family, and having fulfilling experiences on this material level. But true wisdom is worshiping and obeying Allah. True wisdom is understanding where my journey is going to end and planning for that end to my journey, which is ultimately Allah. I am in utter need of Allah, and so I must obey Him so that He can assist me through this journey. But then the Imam, he continues. He says, Al-hikmatu ta'atullah wa ma'rifatul imam. Hikmah means to obey Allah, but also to know one's Imam. In another hadith, the Imam continues, he says, wajtinabul kaba'ir, and to stay away from the cardinal sins. I'd like to just focus tonight on this second point, ma'rifatul imam. Knowing the position of our Imam in our lives. In other words, what is the position of religion and that guidance that comes from Allah? What is the role that can play in bringing us wisdom and taking us to that good life that we are searching for? When we look in Islamic history, and in particular in the Quran, and the way that the Bedouins and the Arabs that the Prophet of Allah had come to, sometimes we might think that these were people who did not know Allah. In the end of the day, believing in a creator and a sustainer, according to the words of the Quran and according to the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, is a part of the fitrah of every human being. فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها لا تبديل لخلق الله. That Allah has created every human being based on a fitrah, and there is no change in that fitrah. And there are certain things that our fitrah teaches us. That first, I did not create myself. And in particular, the Bedouins who were, or the Arabs in general, of that time, who were more in tune with the nature that God had created around them, they may have seen the heavens and the stars in the skies. And they may have wandered in the lands. And they would have seen the creation and the glory of Allah's creation. And so they might have been faced with a beautiful and an orderly creation that we might not actually experience on a day-to-day basis. And so they might have actually had the moment to reflect on where they came from and where they are going to. And so the Quran tells us that these people that we think are backwards and did not have all of the information or the technology or the knowledge that we have, that these were a people who did not even recognize Allah. Quran tells us that in fact they did recognize God. They listened to that fitrah that Allah had given them. And it's interesting, we think of these people as pure polytheists. They built idols out of their own hands, out of stone and rock and wood. And we might think to ourselves, who in their right mind would think that this rock or this stone that they have built out of their own hands is the being that created them, or is the being that sustained them? So we read in the Quran that Allah tells us that these people, in fact, knew about an ultimate creator, an ultimate sustainer, but they just did not know who that creator was, or how to reach and how to call upon their creator, who they would call Allah. In one ayah of the Quran, it says, why are they taking all of these awliya, all of these authorities, all of these idols, these lower gods according to them, and worshipping them? And these people respond, مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَا إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. We do not worship these idols or these lower gods. Some of them may have thought they are the daughters of God, of Allah. Some of them may have thought that they were one deity or another. This ayah of the Quran says that their response is that we do not worship them except so that we can come closer to Allah, so that they can bring us closer to Allah. That Allah, He does not hear our call because He is the creator, and now He is beyond my imagination, my understanding, and He is not going to hear my cries or my du'as. And so I take these idols as a means to reach that Allah, that creator. So they did know about a creator. They just did not know how to reach that Allah, that Rahman. They might have even heard from Christians or the Jews that they were surrounded by. In another ayah of the Quran, it says, قُلُ ادْعُوا اللَّهَ أَوْ ادْعُوا الرَّحْمَنَ أَيًّا مَا تَدْعُوا فَلَهُ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى. Call unto Allah, or call unto Ar-Rahman. Whatever name you might call Allah, it is the same God. Don't think that one tribe has one Lord and another tribe has another. One tribe has one creator and another tribe has another. All of these are names of a single, unified, and single Lord. You might call Him by different names, but ultimately it goes back unto Allah. The point I'm trying to get at is that we, as a human being, with that innate fitrah that Allah has given us, we sometimes have a sense of the truth. We sometimes can discover a little bit about the truth. And if Allah has blessed us with a greater intellect, maybe we come closer to that truth. But ultimately, we have to realize that that intellect is limited. And in and of itself, it is not sufficient. And so Allah has to take our hand. And He has to send a messenger who allows us and gives us the understanding to be able to reach Allah. To give us a proper understanding of who Allah is. Yes, Allah is the creator of the heavens and the earth, and He is beyond my comprehension. And so the Ahlul Bayt, they come and they teach us that Allah has created space. Ayyan al-ayn. And so Allah does not live in space or in time. And Allah has created quality. وَكَيَّفَ الْكَيْفِ. And He does not have a particular quality that I can conjure up in my mind. This is proper Tawheed that we are taught by the Ahlul Bayt. On the one hand, Allah is beyond time and space, beyond anything we can possibly imagine or even possibly describe. Allahu Akbar min an yusaf. That Allah is greater than anything that I can use to describe Allah. But then at the same time, Allah is closer to me than my jugular vein. That Allah hears my cries, and He hears my du'as, and He responds to them. Sometimes that response might come a bit delayed. If I am a true believer, the delay is because Allah wants me to continue in that prayer, for me to call Him even more. And so Islam comes, the difference that Islam makes is not simply to give us those concepts or those principles, but first to establish those principles, and second, to expand my horizons and redefine those principles that my limited intellect may not have truly understood. Yesterday I mentioned that wisdom, according to the Ahlul Bayt, is defined not just in this worldly and material plane, but in terms of our ultimate principles and values. And as well, when we look in the words of the Ahlul Bayt and the Quran, even Tawheed, this very most basic principle, the Prophet takes and he expands for the Arabs of the time and for Muslims throughout history. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. But so the problem does not just stop there. Sometimes, again, in moments of crisis, in moments of difficulty, even the very things that we sometimes have certainty about, even those moments of clarity, they are taken away from us. And so, Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he is describing the time before the Prophet of Islam, the Prophet of Allah had come, he says that the people were in a state of uncertainty. They did not even know the very basic ways of how to live. And so whoever had more power, yes, there were rules, there were norms, and there were accepted principles in society. But when time came for war, when time came for one tribal leader or one tribe to take over another tribe, all of those rules went by the wayside. And so this type of interaction between the different tribes would have caused a sense of instability for the Arabs. They didn't know who is going to attack and who has to now come and defend. And once even the very basic principles of war and of battle and of life are shaken to their very core, then as an individual in that society, I fall into a state of despair, a state of uncertainty. I don't know if tomorrow I am going to have to take up my arms, or tomorrow I'm going to be a refugee. And so those moments of uncertainty, the Prophet comes and he brings not just to establish those principles, but he gives us the means to further those principles in our hearts. I mentioned this ayah of the Quran, Surah Al-Jumu'ah. We might all be familiar with it, where Allah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة. That Allah is the one who sent His messenger towards a people who were illiterate or uneducated or unlettered, however way you might want to translate it, a people who did not know and who did not have that guidance that Allah had promised, who did not have a prophet in their midst. Allah sends that prophet and that messenger unto them. And He recites for them the signs and the verses of Allah. And then He purifies them, وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. And then وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. Sometimes when we feel in our hearts that we don't have that same level of faith or that same sort of connection to Allah, sometimes we might think that there is something wrong with my knowledge. Maybe I need to go out and learn. We might think that our main problem is that we either don't have the right knowledge or, and more importantly, we have all of the facts and we have all of the knowledge that we need, but we just don't know how to implement it. So for example, I might know that I need to be patient, or I need to be steadfast in the face of a difficulty. Or for example, I might need to be courageous, and I might need to go out and do things that I might be afraid of. I might know all of these things, but the problem is I don't have the right habits or the right practice for me to engage in those virtues or in those things that I need to do. Sometimes we think that the problem is I have the knowledge, but I don't have the practice. But according to this verse of the Quran, Allah says that sometimes it's actually that your heart has some sort of knot within it, some sort of problem that stops you from allowing that knowledge to seep into your heart. And that knowledge is prevented from you. That wisdom is taken away from you. And so the issue becomes, وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. He needs to first purify them, and then that yaqeen can come back. وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. So the Prophet, he begins by purifying the Arabs and the people who surrounded him. He begins to describe to them Allah and begins to teach them how to do dua. Again, this hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, that don't think just because you are in a state of tranquility that is when you need to, that is when you are independent and you are not in need of Allah. Only in moments of crisis that we are in need of Allah. Sometimes we have this false sense. But the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt come and teach us that it in fact is in those moments of peace and tranquility and moments when we are filled with the blessings of Allah that sometimes our hearts may sway and swerve away from Allah. And that we become ignorant or heedless of God. That ghafla begins to step in. And that ghafla, that heedlessness, is a more difficult and more harmful illness than moments in which we have the understanding and the feeling that we are in need. The Imam says, مَا الْمُبْتَلَى الَّذِي قَدْ اشْتَدَّ بِهِ الْبَلَاء بِأَحْوَجَ إِلَى الدُّعَاء مِنَ الْمُعَافَى الَّذِي لَا يَأْمَنُ الْبَلَاء. A person who is being tested right now, and his test has become very difficult. He is in a moment of illness, and this illness is unbearable for him. We might think, in that moment I need to call unto Allah. That moment when I have nowhere else to turn to for this difficulty or this pain to be taken away from me. That person is not in any more need of dua than a person who right now has no feeling of difficulty or has no illness. But that second person who is not feeling any pain, who is not going through any difficulty, he does not have any safety from the bala, that trial that can come to him immediately. Who gave him that safety, that sense of security? So that person is in just as much need of dua as the person who is facing some difficulty. And so it is in this process of doing this tazkiyah, of being in a constant state of remembrance of Allah, that we turn towards Allah and we do dua. We ask Allah for Him to aid us and to guide us. When we are not able to do it ourselves, that Allah takes our hands and He shows us the way forward. The first principle was that the Prophet comes and sets our values and broadens our horizons for what it means to believe in God, what it means to believe in Tawheed, and how to connect unto Allah. Second, He gives us the means to acquire that Tawheed. And then third, the Prophet comes and establishes a community and an ummah that is based upon that Tawheed and that taqwa. This is something that was unprecedented at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Where the Prophet comes and establishes a community not based on tribe, not based on wealth, not based on power, but based on taqwa. Person's relationship with Allah. Inna akramakum indallah atqakum. A person whose relationship with Allah is strongest is going to have the highest status within this community. Not because you have wealth, not because you have a large family, or not even because you are in a state of power. If you are the Khalifa of the Muslims, if you are the Amirul Mu'mineen, that does not matter. Rather, what gives you dignity and status is your relationship with God. Inna akramakum indallah atqakum. And basing a community on this taqwa, constantly remembering and being in fear of Allah, being conscious of Allah. That was the community that the Prophet bestowed upon all of us, that we are now connected to each other, not based on our culture, on our language, or even because you are subservient to me or I am subservient to you, but purely based on our relationship with Allah. And now the Prophet comes and gives us the highest example of that taqwa in the person of Amirul Mu'mineen. As we mentioned, Allah, He gives us guidance through the concepts and the principles, the values, through communities, but most importantly through those individuals that He has set as our ultimate symbols and as our ultimate exemplars in our lives. And so the Prophet now comes and he gives to the Ummah a person like Amirul Mu'mineen. It is said that in this verse of the Quran, إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُنْدِرْ وَلِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ هَادٍ, that the Prophet, that Allah says that, O you Prophet, you are indeed but a warner. And there is a hadi, a guide for every community, for every people. The Prophet, it is said in one hadith, he gives the tafsir and the ta'wil of this verse. He says, I am the mundir of this community. And O Ali, you are the Hadi. You are the one who is going to guide my community after I am gone. This is And so when we look in the life of Amirul Mu'mineen, when we want to think about the highest standard for taqwa after the Prophet of Allah, we look in the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam. In the words of Lady Zainab, whenever any of the mushrikeen would come to attack or to harm the Prophet, or to dispel the mission of the Prophet of Islam, the Prophet would send Amirul Mu'mineen and he would vanquish those polytheists and those enemies of the Prophet. قَذَفَ بَأَخِيهِ فِي لَهَوَاتِهَا. He would send his brother Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, so that he might break the jaws of the enemies of Islam and of the enemies of Allah. But then in the personal life, it was a bit difficult for me to try to figure out what to say about Amirul Mu'mineen, what part of his life to describe or to talk about. We can just look in the words of the Imam himself. We want to think about taqwa, want to think about sacrifice, want to think about a person's relationship to Allah. Al-hikmah, ta'atullah, obeying Allah, wa ma'rifatul imam. We look in the words of Amirul Mu'mineen himself. Tonight is a night of dua. The words in the munajat of Amirul Mu'mineen, Imam Ali and the rest of the Ahlul Bayt, they have different types of dua, and we should be aware of these different types, because they point us to the different relationships that we can have with Allah Himself. Some of those du'as are du'as that we are coming to Allah as an utter servant and as someone who has nothing other than Allah. Whatever we have are the blessings of God. And then there are other du'as that are called munajat, where the Imam speaks to God as someone who is speaking to one he loves and he is devoted to. This very intimate relationship and this intimate conversation. The Imam says, Mawlaya ya Mawlaya, Anta al-Mawlaya wa ana al-Abd, wa hal yarhamu al-Abda illa al-Mawla. O my Lord, O my Master, O my Mawla, you are the Mawla, you are the Master over me, and I am just but a slave in front of you. And is there anyone who is going to help a slave but his master? Mawlaya ya Mawlaya, Anta al-Ghaniyu wa ana al-Faqir. O my master, you are the one who is wealthy and is in no need of anyone else, and I am the one who is in utter need. وَهَلْ يَرْحَمُ الْفَقِيرَ إِلَّا الْغَنِيَّ. Is there anyone who is going to help the poor and the destitute other than the one who is needless and independent? It is on a night like this that Amirul Mu'mineen had heard the prophecy of Rasulullah himself. Rasulullah had told Amirul Mu'mineen that one day he is going to be killed on the path of Islam. And so Amirul Mu'mineen turns to the Prophet and he asks him, O my Prophet, O Ya Rasulullah, what is going to be my state when I am going to reach my end? The Prophet says that you are going to be in the current state that you are. You are not going to swerve from your devotion and your dedication to Allah and to Islam. And so Amirul Mu'mineen says, let come what may come. If I am on the path of Allah and His Prophet, then I am willing to accept any sacrifice or any pain or any difficulty that may come my way. And so the Prophet told Amirul Mu'mineen how he was going to be killed. And maybe even on what day and what signs the creation of Allah are going to give him. And so it is said that a night like tonight, in the final year of the life of Amirul Mu'mineen, in this final Ramadan, Amirul Mu'mineen would spend time in the house of each one of his children. On one day, he would spend time in the house of Imam al-Hasan. On the next day, he would spend time in the house of Imam al-Hussein. The third day, in the house of Lady Zainab. On the fourth day, in the house of Kulthum. And maybe this was a way for Amirul Mu'mineen to give his final farewell to his children, to spend those final few days and final few moments with his beloved children. But yet it is said that on a night like tonight, Amirul Mu'mineen spends this night in iftar in the house of his daughter Kulthum. It is said that on a night like tonight, Kulthum comes and spreads the tablecloth for Amirul Mu'mineen and prepares an iftar. In the end of the day, this is her father who has come and has blessed her house with his presence. And she is going to honor the Imam. And so she brings a very simple iftar, but she tries to honor him with two things at the tablecloth. Imam Ali, he turns to Kulthum. He says, "Oh Kulthum." Maybe he thanks her. Then he says, "Oh Kulthum, when have you seen that I have two separate things at my table? I do not want to meet my Lord in a state where I have a full belly. So take one of these away. Either take away the salt or take away the milk." And he says to take away the milk. And it is said that Amirul Mu'mineen had a different state on that night. And maybe Kulthum, she senses that difference. It is said that Amirul Mu'mineen would look up at the stars and he would say, these are the signs that Rasulullah had told me would come on a night like tonight. And so when he finishes his iftar, he spends the rest of the night in ibadah of Allah. And it is said that when the morning comes, and Amirul Mu'mineen is now venturing out to go towards the masjid, it is said that Amirul Mu'mineen is now preparing himself. It is the final moments of his life, those final days of his life before he is struck. It is said that as Amirul Mu'mineen is exiting from the house of Lady Kulthum, the belt of Amirul Mu'mineen is snagged by a nail. And we might think that this might be an opportunity for him to turn around, that the creation of God is telling him to stop. But then Amirul Mu'mineen, he tightens his belt. And he says, "Ushdud hayazayka lil mawti fa inna al mawta laqika." Tighten your belt, prepare yourself for death. Amirul Mu'mineen is giving himself that consolation. Prepare yourself for death, for indeed death will come and meet you. وَلَا تَجْزَعْ مِنَ الْمَوْتِ إِذَا حَلَّ بَوَادِيكَ. And do not be terrified and do not fear from death if it comes in your valley and in your presence. And so Amirul Mu'mineen prepares himself. He tightens his belt and he drapes his clothes close to him and he exits from his house. And it is said that at this moment, even the very animals would surround Amir al-Mu'mineen. There were birds that would surround Amir al-Mu'mineen. And maybe people would come and try to dispel those birds from around him. And he, Amir al-Mu'mineen, would say, let them be. Yes, they are crying. But now, right after their cries, you are going to hear even more mourning that is going to come. And so maybe Lady Kulthum, she is preparing herself. She sees the state of her father. And maybe she tries to prevent Amir al-Mu'mineen from going to the masjid. But Amir al-Mu'mineen has prepared himself. He has dedicated himself. And now he is going towards the masjid. And so maybe Lady Kulthum is keeping her ear out to make sure that no ill or no harm comes to the Imam. And the Imam goes towards the masjid. He is now waking up each of the believers and even of those munafiqeen that were lying in wait for him. And it is said that he begins the adhan, and then he begins the iqamah, and then he begins his prayer. And as he goes down into the sajda, it is said that at that moment his head is struck by the poisonous blade of Ibn Muljam. And it is at this moment that maybe Lady Kulthum hears the cries, not just of the creation of Allah, but even the angels of Allah. It is said that Jibreel himself, he cries out, Tahaddamat wallah arkan al-huda. Now the pillars of the guidance of Allah, by Allah, they are now crumbling. And even the very rope of Allah, now it has been severed. Qutila ibn Ammi Mustafa. Now the cousin of Mustafa, the Prophet of Allah, has been struck and he has been killed. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ راجعون.
मुल्ज़िम ने हैदर को मारा, इब्न मुल्ज़िम ने हैदर को मारा, रोज़ादारों क़यामत के दिन है। इब्न मुल्ज़िम ने हैदर को मारा, इब्न मुल्ज़िम ने हैदर को मारा, रोज़ादारों क़यामत के दिन है। हाय छुटता है अब तुमसे मौला, हाय छुटता है अब तुमसे मौला, रोज़ादारों क़यामत के दिन है। इब्न मुल्ज़िम ने हैदर को मारा, इब्न मुल्ज़िम ने हैदर को मारा, रोज़ादारों क़यामत के दिन है। सूनी कब्र رسول خدا ہے گھر میں زہرا کے ماتم بپا ہے سونی قبر رسول خدا ہے گھر میں زہرا کے ماتم بپا ہے خاک اڑاتا ہے حیدر کا کنبہ خاک اڑاتا ہے حیدر کا کنبہ روزہ دار و قیامت کے دن ہے ابن ملجم نے حیدر کو مارا ابن ملجم نے حیدر کو مارا روزہ دار و قیامت کے دن ہے آل احمد پہ آفت ہے آئی بے کسوں پر یتیمی ہے چھائی آل احمد پہ آفت ہے آئی بے کسوں پہ یتیمی ہے چھائی اٹھ گیا سر سے حیدر کا سایہ اٹھ گیا سر سے حیدر کا سایہ روزہ دار و قیامت کے دن ہے ابن ملجم نے حیدر کو مارا ابن ملجم نے حیدر کو مارا روزہ دار و قیامت کے دن ہے گھر میں خالق کے حیدر کو مارا جانشین پیغمبر کو مارا گھر میں خالق کے حیدر کو مارا جانشین پیغمبر کو مارا ہائے سجدے میں سر ہے تمہارا ہائے سجدے میں سر ہے تمہارا روزہ دار و قیامت کے دن ہے ابن ملجم نے حیدر کو مارا ابن ملجم نے حیدر کو مارا روزہ دار و قیامت کے دن ہے کیوں نہ روئے یہ غم کم نہیں ہے شب یہ عاشور سے کم نہیں ہے کیوں نہ روئے یہ غم کم نہیں ہے شب یہ عاشور سے کم نہیں ہے خلد میں بھی یہ ماتم ہے برپا خلد میں بھی یہ ماتم ہے برپا روزہ دار و قیامت کے دن ہے ابن ملجم نے حیدر کو مارا ابن ملجم نے حیدر کو مارا روزہ دار و قیامت کے دن ہے دل ہلاتے ہیں زینب کے نالے خاک اڑاتے ہیں سب خدمے والے دل ہلاتے ہیں زینب کے نالے خاک اڑاتے ہیں سب خدمے والے اٹھ رہا ہے علی کا جنازہ اٹھ رہا ہے علی کا جنازہ روزہ دار و قیامت کے دن ہے ابن ملجم نے حیدر کو مارا ابن ملجم نے حیدر کو مارا روزہ دار و قیامت کے دن ہے ہائے چھٹتا ہے اب تم سے مولا ہائے چھٹتا ہے اب تم سے مولا روزہ دار و قیامت کے دن ہے ابن ملجم نے حیدر کو مارا ابن ملجم نے حیدر کو مارا حیدر مولا 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 حیدر مولا
Brothers and sisters, we will have ziyarat after the amal. So I would request if you can please find seating at this point. Volunteers will be distributing Qur'ans, and if you need a turba, we will also be distributing those as well. If you do need a moment to refresh your wudu, now would be a perfect time to do that as well.